Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to this decision session for the Environment and Climate Emergency Portfolio on the 27th of February. My name is Jenny Kent. I'm Joint Exec Member for the Environment and Climate. And Councillor Kate Revilius, with whom I job share, sends her apologies today, but is in full agreement with all the decisions that are about to be taken. First of all, can I just ask if anyone's got any declarations of interest in any of the matters in this report? I don't. Just me. I don't have any. Secondly, does anyone have any corrections that they'd like to make to the minutes of the decision session held on the 21st of November? Councillor Revilius has already said that she's happy with that as an accurate record, so if I sign that. Okay. It's done. Thank you. I approve those. And now we come to public participation. So we have three people who have registered to speak, and I have a number of written representations, but I think the first person speaking is Mrs. Claire Brown, and she's remote. Whenever you're ready, Claire.
Hello, thanks very much for having me. My name's Claire Brown. I'm a York mother with kids at Scarcroft and Millthorpe, and I live on Bishopthorpe Road. I wanted to speak today because I'm really keen to see the roadside verges mowing regime changed in York. Now, I know this is really basic, but if you look at the scientific trials, you can see that reduced mowing in urban areas does help biodiversity. I know that's not rocket science, but if you go and look at the papers, then you can see that if we change the mowing regime, then you will improve biodiversity in York. But I know this is not a matter of taste. So whether you like looking at neatly clipped verges or wildlife meadows, everyone can see the advantages encouraging nature to flourish in the city. However, I do appreciate that not everybody likes a non-neatly clipped verge. There's a lot of people who really like their grass nice and chopped. And so I'd urge you to look at other schemes around the country where they've signed these lovely wildlife verges. So for example, West Sussex County Council signage for verges is a lovely stylized B with community road verge, nature friendly written on it. So it's a good way of pointing out that this is being grown for nature. And in other good news, Braintree Council have found no discernible difference in the amount of litter in mown and wildflower verges, and also cut and collect actually reduces the amount of litter in a verge, which is brilliant, obviously. Cambridge Council have found that roadside verge parking has been reduced with wildflowers. If you've got a wildflower meadow, then people are much less likely to park on it, which obviously means that your roadside verges don't get torn up so much in urban areas. And those are the main things, really. I suppose my last point is that York scores only 19% for biodiversity in UK's Climate Council climate scorecards. And so for my kids' future and for the future of the planet, I'd obviously love to see this change. So please consider changing the mowing regime in York. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Claire. Your points will be taken into account and noted. Thank you. Next, we have Mrs. Nicola Ward, who's here in person. Thanks, Nicola. You want to come to the table?
So I'm Nicola and I work at Picnic. So I do want to declare that we do get the holiday from the City of York Council Public Realm to maintain the nature reserve that we work on. And we also work with the City of York Council on a range of different land management projects. I'm also here as a resident. I live in Fulford, and I'm part of a local residents group called Green and Cleaner Fulford, who are actually currently turning a verge in Hutchinson Lane into a wildflower meadow. We're working on our Green Corridors project, which has been going for 2.5 years, working all along the rivers and some of the becks. But the new phase is going to be more of an urban Green Corridor project, which will be working on green spaces that are isolated, pockets of green, potentially with interested parties already involved, some may not, but working with people local to the area where the green spaces are in order to try and improve it for wildlife and for people. So I'm here to support all the measures that you're suggesting because they align entirely with our Green Corridors project. The benefits of doing these things, the reduced mowing, reduction in glyphosate spray, is that it might encourage community groups to get more involved in their local area, which everyone knows improves people's mental health. their feeling connectedness to their neighbourhoods, working together towards a common goal. You know, it has been mentioned that York is surrounded by green spaces and people have the option to go out into these wilder spaces, but without efforts to join up and improve areas that are already within the city, York may become a desert, you know, unable to support wildlife in the way that it could. And just one last thing, I was working out on Millennium Field yesterday and I mentioned the proposals to reduce the number of cuts to the verges to a lady who walks her dog and comes to chats to her every time she sees us. She's a bit of a butterfly enthusiast and she was absolutely thrilled with the suggestion that the memo gets reduced. So, all positive.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Your comments are very welcome. And we then have Councillor Hollier, who's speaking remotely. Can you hear us, Councillor Hollier?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
I forgot to say to the previous two speakers that they very politely kept to the 3-minute deadline, but I'm sure you know there's a 3-minute deadline. Do you want a warning when you're close to it, or are you happy to go ahead?
I'll be okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. So it's disappointing that there's been no consultation or pre-decision scrutiny ahead of these proposals being published for decision. Paragraph 21 makes reference to officers and executive members having talked to city partners at a range of events. But to be clear, this is not consultation, as we saw with the recent decision to impose charging for garden waste collection. The administration appears to be committed to a behind closed doors approach to policy development in which councillors and residents are shut out. The report gives rise to a number of questions that could have been helpfully discussed at a pre-decision scrutiny session, but as we've been denied that opportunity, I'm raising these questions here. Paragraph 14 states that 2 staff posts and 2 vehicles are being axed, but there is no assessment to the extent to which the service will be able to cope with staff absences and vehicle breakdowns in future. So how resilient will these new arrangements be? Paragraph 15 delegates authority to officers to trial alternative weed treatment options, not previously trialled in York, but gives no further details. So what are these alternative approaches and what confidence is there that these will be any more effective than the alternatives already trialled? Paragraph 32 suggests that parish councils can expect to receive a reduction in income from CYC. Some parish councils will employ staff who will be affected by these changes in open space management. So can the executive member confirm what consultation has been undertaken with parish councils? The table on page 17 lists possible trial sites. Can the executive member please confirm what engagement has taken place with the relevant ward members? The same goes for the larger open spaces listed in the table on pages 18 to 20. Paragraph 38 refers to the mowing regime at some recreational spaces, but other spaces are not mentioned, such as Cheshiesfield, Foxwood Park, Little Hob Moor. Will they be subject to different arrangements? Paragraph 52 states that residents are free to weed the pavement in front of their homes. Many, of course, already do this and also dig out the curbsides to reduce the opportunity for weed growth and collect leaves that fall from trees. The report says nothing about the likelihood of residents now being less inclined to do this if they're now being charged by the council to dispose of the resulting green waste. My colleague, Councillor Waller, has provided a response to James Gilchrist for Westfield Ward. The key points are that there has not been enough local engagement with ward councillors to go through the locations where changes are being proposed, let alone consultation with residents. Recreation space is at a premium in many wards, and therefore getting that right for sport, informal play and active travel is essential for a council which claims that it's working to address health inequalities. Having a map for each area making clear what service standards will be applied is vital to let council taxpayers know what they are getting for their money. So more likely to achieve our environmental objectives through meaningful engagement with ward members, residents associations and parish councillors. So going forward, I'd urge the executive member to tap into the enthusiasm and local knowledge that exists in further refining these plans and start delivering on the claim to be a listening council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollier. Our officers will obviously address some of the points raised, but I welcome your comments and endorse the need for engagement and going forwards, which is exactly what is proposed. Thank you. If I could also refer to some written statements I've received which I can read at discretion, but some of them vary in length. So the agreement is that I will note them. They are published online, the ones that were received in time, and they are here in paper form for anyone to read. I received an email from Dr. Tony Burrell, who urges us to phase out glyphosate as soon as possible and use alternative methods adopted by other councils. I received an email from Steve Galloway, who expresses concern about lack of consultation for different mowing regimes in amenity spaces, and is worried about difficulties if the grass is too long. I received an email from Sue Werrett, who's a resident of Westfield, who is very concerned about glyphosate use, has expressed these concerns over a period of time since last summer, and feels it goes against the pollinator policy and is in complete contradiction to it, and says no financial constraint can justify its continued use, especially on quad bikes. I've received an email from Julie Fern, a professional horticulturalist, who gives her full support for increased tolerance of weeds citywide, longer verges, and a change to sustainable planting, both on biodiversity grounds and on aesthetic grounds. And I have also received emails from Councillor Waller, asking, as Councillor Holly has mentioned, for greater consultation and for effective management of verge cutting and weed control, and an email from Councillor Waters, who expresses concerns about the use of quad bikes, a preference for in-house warp sprays for glyphosate, better management, and a desire for improved clearance of roundabouts and verges to better enable wildflower growth. Thank you. If I could hand over to officers, if you could introduce yourself before speaking, if you could outline the report before us today. Thank you.
I'll just do a bit of introduction. So I'm James Gilchrist, I'm the Director for Environment, Transport and Planning. 30 odd years ago at Horticultural College, I was taught that weed is a plant in the wrong place. What this report does is review our maintenance of the public grounds and determine what is the wrong place. There are places absolutely where weeds are not appropriate, and first and foremost, that's about keeping our pavements and transport networks free from obstruction, especially if those obstructions disable people. There are also some invasive weeds which we'll treat and target because of their invasive nature. Historically, the council's used glyphosate-based weed killer 3 times a year. We have trialled alternative weed treatments with limited success, but the recent trial of just 2 treatments over the last 2 years in some locations has been successful and not caused significantly more obstructions. We've tried to find an alternative so that we can eliminate glyphosate or the use of quad bikes, but they cost significantly more and they're not affordable within the budget. So the report proposes 2 glyphosate treatments per year rather than 3, with the ability for wards to opt out if they wish to remove weeds in another way. And then obviously we'll continue to work with councillors so that can be achieved in a safe way. Beyond that, there are good reasons to review our tolerance of where is the wrong place for a larger flowering plant. We want to be carbon neutral by 2030 as a council, and we know that cutting grass burns fossil fuels and is not good for wildlife. We know that these plants are really beneficial to insects and important to biodiversity. Our pollinator strategy, which was developed through scrutiny, says we should make council-owned land and buildings more pollinator friendly and to identify areas of green space which will benefit from a reduced cutting regime. This report is doing exactly that. By cutting grass less often and trying areas where grass is perfectly left to grow even longer, we can support pollinators. Of course, there are some locations, such as sports pitches, which rely on short grass, where grass will be cut more often. Finally, what I'll just say is this is not just a York issue or in any way specific to York. The current Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Nature has urged everyone to reconsider what is a weed and cut grass less often. This is all part of the global challenge for pollinators and climate. The world faces a challenge around the use of glyphosate, but we've seen councils who removed its use go back to using it as the alternative, so either not effective or affordable. Therefore, the recommendations in this report are, we believe, a proportionate response to balance up our responsibilities, the global challenge in our local policies. I'll hand over to Ben, who might want to go through some of the very fine detail, but I think in terms of the context, that sets out the policy context.
Thank you, James.
Okay, thank you, James. My name's Ben Graham. I'm Head of Environmental Services, and obviously thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. The report focuses on a number of proposed service developments within public realm and set out a number of options in terms of service delivery that can help us as a council to meet our environmental commitments. Public realm is obviously all of the outdoor spaces in our city, which are publicly accessible. So our roads, our footpaths, our verges, our parks, open spaces and play areas. The public realm team as a service are responsible for a wide variety of tasks, and they're listed in detail in paragraph 17 of the report. As a service, we have reflected on our current approaches, our budget, and sought ways to ensure what we are doing can meet both our environmental and climate commitments. As part of this review, we've looked at a number of opportunities we feel that there are to change and amend some of our working practices, and we sought to work with colleagues in public health and the council's ecologist in identifying some possible opportunities for change in the future. What I would say is not all of these changes are immediate. Some are identified as possible options for us to work towards and trial in the coming months and years. And we can obviously build on those trials with obviously consultation with appropriate members, councillors, and obviously local community groups. The service developments that are proposed reflect a number of key areas and centre on virgin open space management, sustainable planting, and bedding and weed control. So in relation to verge and open space management, it's proposed that we move to a cut of urban highway verges and housing land to maintain the height of grass at around about 15 centimetres, so in practice, a move to 6 cuts per year. Advice from the council's ecologist on the benefits of this and other proposed changes are included within Appendix 1 of the report. We also propose to retain the current approach in terms of our management of rural verges, where we cut a 1 metre strip to ensure that grass does not impede the passage of traffic, but also that we leave other areas to grow along to encourage natural habitats to form and enhance biodiversity. Also identified in the report are suggested areas where the council can explore options to adopt a more relaxed approach to mowing or trial wildflower areas. These are referenced within paragraph 34 of the report, and paragraph 36 of the report also identifies where some of our larger open spaces may be suitable in the future for relaxed mowing. Obviously, as part of that, we will need to engage with yourself, obviously, as executive members and other councillors and the community to identify how and when we take those programmes forward. And again, how we can engage with partners to potentially work on some of those sites. James has already mentioned that paragraph 38 of the report refers to the management of formal parks, sports pitches. I just wanted to clarify, we will continue to obviously cut those every 3 weeks to make sure that obviously the local teams can still enjoy good quality pitches on which to play sport. In terms of sustainable planting and bedding, it's proposed to move away from the use of bedding plants, which are currently planted twice per year, and a move to a more sustainable planting. This is to seek to deliver ecological benefits and increase pollinator planting. It's proposed to start with a trial on some beds within the city centre as a proof of concept before looking to roll this out further to other areas. Paragraph 40 of the report identifies some of the areas where we feel that a move to sustainable planting can work, but we want to do that trial within the city centre so that we can make sure that the ecological benefits that we believe it's going to deliver are actually delivered in practice. In terms of weed control, as James has alluded to, the council has a duty to manage its highway and footway infrastructure across the city, but it also needs to balance that with its commitments to seek to minimise the use of glyphosate and other chemicals. To this end, in 2021, the council trialled a number of alternative weed control methods. This included an anoic acid, an acetic acid, and manual removal. The anoic acid and acetic acid were not effective in controlling weeds, achieving nothing like the results that glyphosate did. Manual removal is an effective way of removing weeds, but obviously is a very difficult task to be replicated citywide due to obviously the cost and the size of the highway network that we're responsible for managing. In 2022 and 2023, 2 weed pilots have been undertaken where ward members have had the opportunities to trial alternative weed treatment methods in their areas. A number of wards took the decision to participate in these pilots and they're referenced within the report. Those areas saw a reduction in the number of sprays from 3 sprays to 2. There have been some areas where obviously no weed spraying has been undertaken at all. For example, Alvington within the Weldrake ward has been a specific trial with the local councillor there. Ward members have been asked to feedback on the outcome of these trials, and those are included in paragraph 47 of the report, but also referenced separately within Appendix 3. So there are obviously a form that some councillors have filled in, and there is a specific report from Councillor Vassy about the experiences in Weldrake. The council has sought to work with partners such as the Environment Agency and the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust to ascertain their treatment methodologies and what they're looking at doing in terms of managing their estate in terms of the use of glyphosate. We've liaised with the Pesticide Action Network and consulted Friends of the Earth in terms of looking at alternative ways and management approaches. We've sought to work and exchange ideas with other local authorities, and as James has already said, we are not alone in York in trying to overcome this challenge. In fact, a number of local authorities have had to recommence chemical treatments in recent months, having taken the decision to move away from chemical treatments, and again, those are referenced within the body of the report. The council has considered options for bringing weed control in-house, but for staffing reasons and obviously the investment required for equipment, it does not make that option value for money. If residents wish to remove weeds for themselves on pavements, then obviously that is absolutely fine. The less weeds that there are, the less that we will need to spray. So York is very lucky that we have an engaged and environmentally astute resident base who support the city, and we encourage that to continue. At this current moment in time, glyphosate does remain the most effective method of weed control and is the most affordable option within the current ways of working. Therefore, the recommendation within the report is that we tender a contract as an open tender for weed control for 2 years with an option to extend for 2 years. As part of that contract, we are seeking a supplier to deliver a contract for up to 2 sprays citywide, but the contract will also cover an option to trial any future weed treatment methodologies that may become available, and suppliers have been asked to commit to that as part of the tender. In terms of assessing our impact, a qualities impact assessment has been completed, and that's included within Appendix 4 of the report. From an accessibility perspective, there are some comments noted in the equality impact assessment that need to be kept under the review in terms of accessibility, and we will do that. Paragraph 59 of the report also highlights the organisational impact and implications of the recommendations that are contained within this report, and they include some key observations from legal, procurement, health and well-being from our colleagues in public health, and obviously our environment and climate action implications. In conclusion, the report and the appendices set out a number of options and recommendations for yourself and Councillor Ravilius to consider. Not all of these changes can be delivered immediately, but they offer an insight into what can be delivered in the future. A number of these will need to be built into a programme where we will need to engage, obviously, with yourselves as executive members and other members about how and when some of these schemes are potentially introduced. If agreed, the council would obviously need to develop that plan and deliver on these aspirations in a timely manner. Therefore, I would ask that the executive members consider the recommendations and the reasons listed, which are included within paragraph 15 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any other offers or comments? Is that something? Could I ask a couple of questions? Paragraph 40, the table of potential bedding areas, just for clarification, some of those say fill with grass. Let me find it. Fill and seed with grass. And there might be specific reasons for that, but just for partly to answer questions from our speakers and those who've inquired by email, all these areas have been identified as trials, and you're starting with the city centre, but the filling and seeding with grass would be the last resort. Is that right? You're just exploring possibilities.
Yeah, we're just exploring possibilities at this stage, and it's obviously got to fit in with what's in the local environment as well. So rather than taking a blanket approach, we would need to obviously judge it on a kind of scheme by scheme basis. Obviously, the last option would be to fill and seed with grass, and we'd explore all other options first, but we have to make sure it's in fitting with what the local environment is as well.
Absolutely. And moving out of the city from the city centre, the potential sites that are listed, these are places which have not yet been offered to community groups or ward councillors, because this is a future management plan. So consultation is, or some of them have, where it's been identified that they have. But I see that Dave Mee wants to add in on that.
If I may, Chair, Dave Mee, one of the operation managers for the public realm. So the iterate, nothing is fixed, and we're not starting from a fixed point either. So some of these sites have a history which predates this paper, and there are discussions which have gone on for a number of years, for a number of weeks, about a whole variety of sites across the city. So that's there is already work outside of that immediate catchment taking place.
Thank you, that's helpful. I think this is just to assure those who are concerned about lack of consultation, or that this is something that's going to be imposed tomorrow, that this is work in progress, there's history to it, and consultation will continue with appropriate community groups or ward councillors. Thank you. Can I also ask a bit about clarity for paragraphs 51? Currently, this is on the issue of glyphosate. Currently, we don't use glyphosate within parks or playgrounds. That's right, isn't it? We phased that out a while ago. Am I correct in that?
We spray around the perimeter fences of play areas, to make sure there's no ingrowth of weeds. But yes, not within the play areas.
Because I think it's important. I've had quite a lot of correspondence from residents who are concerned about glyphosate, saying they cite other councils who say we've banned the use of glyphosate, but when you investigate further, what they're actually doing is not spraying in parks and amenity spaces, but they are still using glyphosate as a weed control method in highways. But we don't use it in parks, within parks and playgrounds in any event. That's right.
Not within the park, as I said. The intention within the park is to keep that environment as sterile as possible for use, obviously, by children and young families. And obviously, but we do need to make sure that we control weed growth around those kind of perimeter fences, so we don't find any ingrowth of weeds.
Thank you. And we've also recently switched so that we no longer spray around tree pits. That's trimmed instead. So where we can, we're making reductions.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you. So to address some of the concerns about previous weed control and the use of quad bikes and inaccurate spraying, can you help me a bit about how any future contract that's taken on will be effectively managed in order to prevent this happening again, or that kind of concern arising?
Yeah, I suppose there's two things really within the contract. So as part of the tender, we've asked all of the suppliers to identify a preferred treatment method to see if there are obviously any alternatives that they would suggest to using quad bikes. In terms of our internal management, for a period of time, we as a public realm service didn't have an operations manager. I'm glad to say that obviously Ed Bland is now recruited into that role and has done some sterling work over the last 9 months that Ed's been with us, and it'll be Ed that will be working with myself to manage the contract that we let for this, to make sure that effective contract management is in place.
Thank you. And with reference to Councillor Hollier's concern about the vagaries around future trials, this is just making sure that any future contracts, if I could just check my understanding, any future contractor is happy to undertake future trials should new methods of weed control come available in the next 2 years, which is the first period of the full review.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, obviously, as alluded to within the report, we've already undertaken a number of trials ourselves as a city council, which unfortunately have proved unsuccessful. Obviously, if there are any further developments in the market, then the contractors have been asked to participate in a trial and indicate their willingness to participate in those trials as part of the tender for the contract.
So it's keeping the door open.
It's exactly that. Exactly that.
Thank you. And can I just make one inquiry about the trial of stiffer mechanical brushes on the street cleaning vehicles in Weldrake?
Yes.
Which Councillor Bassey thought was very successful. And as I understand it, that's been spread out across the whole of the city now, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So as standards now on our sweeping equipment that we use, so our road sweepers and path sweepers, in those areas, we've actually purchased now the stiffer brushes following that trial in Weldrake, and that's fitted as standard onto our sweeping equipment.
And is it fair to say that will have a greater impact on reduction of weeds growth because it does a better job of cleaning the gullies out?
Yeah, in terms of the trial that we found, we found that because the stiffer brush actually brings more of the material up, then yes, we found that to be more effective at actually removing detritus and any weed growth from the channels.
Thank you. And lastly, can I ask a bit about our proposed reduction in numbers of cuts to verges? And there are, as all our speakers recognise, mixed opinions about this, but with an aim for biodiversity, there is also obviously also a cost element. It will be a reduction in cost, which is, we have to take a realistic approach to the council's budget. But there are concerns from councillors Hollier and Waller in particular about the inability to cut grass if it gets too long. Will our machinery be able to cope if we have an unseasonably wet or possibly seasonably wet spell as the seasons change?
Yeah, I mean, all of the proposals have been developed in line with obviously the council's budget to make sure that we can deliver that from a resources perspective. In terms of our cutting equipment, our ride-on mowers, which obviously undertake the vast majority of mowing of residential verges, are actually a flail head as opposed to a cylinder head, which means that they're more effective on cutting the longer grass. Cylinder heads tend to be for more ornamental mowing or lower cut grass. So yeah, all the equipment that we've got is absolutely fine to deliver what's included within the report.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think it only remains for me to go to the recommendations. So I note the content of paragraph 15.1, and I agree the proposed changes in management of verges and open spaces. I note the content at paragraph 15.2 and agree the changes to sustainable planting. I should say I note and fully support it for all the reasons outlined. The increased biodiversity, I hope, is obvious to all, but these are great changes. I fully support them. I note content of 15.3, reduction of glyphosate to 2 sprays. Clearly, it would be remiss of me not to say that there is likely to be increased weed growth on the highways over the summer, particularly with increased wet and warm weather. But as we saw from the previous trials, come autumn, that will be removed and cleared. And so overall, there is no difficulties in terms of access. It may require some greater tolerance from the public in terms of perception, but I hope that they understand the rationale behind this and will see the benefits. As such, I note the content of paragraph 15 and approve paragraph 15.4 to delegate responsibility to procure a new contract for weed control. I have noted the concerns of members and residents as to poor implementation of the previous contract or previous weed management, in particular quad bikes travelling at speed and the perception of untargeted spraying. I hear that we have additional resources in place to monitor that more effectively, and I'm assured that that's going to be helpful. I do also take note of the alternatives being extremely expensive. In addition to the outline trials that the officers have spoken of, the executive members, myself and Kate, have made extensive inquiries with other local authorities and other executive members across the country, all of whom agree that they have done partial trials or some trials, and they've either reverted back or found it to be too difficult to manage in terms of finance. I can't avoid the fact that we are facing very difficult budget challenges. This year we've had to save 14 million. We're set to have to save 10 million pounds a year for the next 3 years. Ideal scenarios are not just that, ideal, but we have to work within the finance that we have. And as such, I think the difficult balance of reducing glyphosate for the environment, but also maintaining our streets so that they're accessible for all and don't cause trip hazards. But currently, the best way we can do this is with that proposed reduction to 2 sprays. And I look forward to seeing whatever contract is awarded, and I'm reassured that they'll be open to any trials of future technologies or different types of spray that can be used. So I approve the recommendations in the report. If I could also take this opportunity to thank all the officers and also all our staff on the ground who do this work day in, day out in all weathers. Their work's really appreciated. I hope you could extend our thanks to them, and I hope the rest of the city will join me in saying how fantastic it is that you're all working towards a better environment within really challenging financial circumstances. So thank you very much.
We'll pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lee. Yeah,